Welcome to another edition of Let's Talk Criterion, and in this edition we take a look at the 1964 film I Am Cuba.
Loco amor que en la sangre me hierve, no puedo estar.
Soy Cuba, I Am Cuba is a film that accounts for a state of revolution that didn't take place at all. The film appeared 3 decades late. The movie was directed by Mikhail Kalatozov, and he used to be a great fanatic of moving pictures even during his early days of childhood. Now, the film product was indeed a major accomplishment on his part. During the 1960s, the Soviet Union was experiencing intense de-Stalinization, and at the same time, communist uprising that was considered to be popular erupted about 180 kilometers away from the shores of America, in the island of Cuba. I Am Cuba is shot in black and white, and sometimes it uses infrared film obtained from the Soviet military to exaggerate contrast, for instance making trees and sugarcane almost white and skies very dark indeed, but still obviously sunny. Most shots are in extreme wide angle and the camera passes very close to its subjects, whilst still largely avoiding having those subjects ever look directly at the camera. The movie consists of 4 distinct short stories about the suffering of the Cuban people and their reactions, varying from passive amazement in the first to a guerrilla march in the last. And between the stories, there's a female narrator credited the voice of Cuba, saying such things as I am Cuba, the Cuba of the casinos, but also of the people. Now, in the first story, Havana is overrun by Americans and their casinos. And Maria is a peasant woman and she wants to marry her fruit seller boyfriend Rene. And Maria secretly goes out to bars at night, introducing herself as Betty and doing sex work to help save money. In the second tale, we watch Pedro, a sugar farmer, have his largest crop taken from him by an unscrupulous landlord who has sold the land to the United Fruit Company. The third part focuses on Enrique. He's a student at Havana University and he has become frustrated with the patient and thoughtful revolutionary group that he joined at school. And the final story is about Mariano. He's a farmer, he has a family, and he rejects an offer from a revolutionary to join the movement. Now, when the Soviet director Mikhail Kalatozov was commissioned to make a film about the Cuban Revolution, he really made a film that was hallucinatory, freewheeling and a work of communist kitsch, a pastiche of Soviet and Cuban symbolism that tries to combine camp and revolution, and it's shot with a gravity-defying, always in motion, emotional camera, a cinephile's dream in fact. Well, certainly that's the myth that is built around this film anyway. Now, I Am Cuba was the first Soviet-Cuban co-production, and it was hated by both countries equally upon its release. The Soviets hated it for being too artsy, and the Cubans hated it for being inauthentic. It remained in relative obscurity for nearly 30 years until it was rediscovered by America. More recently, the new restoration done by the Milestone Films of this movie brings up questions of authenticity once again. Now, it's in the area of cinematography where I Am Cuba most impresses. In one sequence, the camera follows a funeral procession through the Havana streets, and suddenly the camera lifts off the ground and travels up the side of a building, through a window, and it returns back to the funeral procession, continuing below, all in a single shot. Now, even in today's age of drone photography, this would be highly difficult to achieve. But in actuality, in the 60s, the filmmakers used a makeshift elevator and planks, and they passed the handheld camera between 2 cameramen in a carefully timed and choreographed sequence, attached to 2 cables to guide it over the street for the final part of the shot. And of course, it all looks seamless on screen. And when we get to the film's most famous shot, that's the one which begins with the Western revelers all gathered for a beauty contest on a hotel rooftop, and then it descends several floors down to the pool and goes into the pool itself and shoots the action underwater. Kalatozov and Urezevsky, the cameraman, reportedly had a special submarine periscope cleaner made available so they could dip in and out of the water without any drops screwing up the lens. Now, director Paul Thomas Anderson was so impressed that he lifted this shot wholesale for his film Boogie Nights, and it's such that many modern contemporary filmmakers will do this. They just copy a famous shot. The soundtrack is also impressive. Music, especially in this, plays a vital role with the nightclub and the singers and the performance of Loco Amor and the fruit seller's melodic call of Oranges and California Plums as another example. And of course, there's the voice of the narrator reading lines. The script was written by two poets, one was Russian and the other Cuban, and it knits these spaces together. Now, this new 4K restoration by Milestone from 2019, which Criterion is using, is a revelation. The close-ups feel almost intrusively close in 4K, and the music and limited dialogue are really intimate. And for those of us who've seen the original versions of I Am Cuba, they've included, of course, a bizarre Spanish-Russian soundtrack with the voiceover delivered in both languages. And this version combines the best available image and sound. And restoration is always linked with ideas about authenticity. Milestone Films gained distribution rights to the film back in the mid-1990s, before which the film itself was virtually unseen outside of Cuba and the USSR. And since then, Milestone has re-released the film in 2005, and that version had the Spanish-only soundtrack and showed splotches, bad splices, and most noticeably, a flicker due to lab work. These issues were all corrected in the new 4K restoration, and with it the vibrancy of the film is restored and its overall clarity and image presentation. Cuba itself is imagined as a land locked in time, with its mid-century automobiles, pastel-coloured peeling buildings, and other symbols that serve as shorthands for pastness. When Milestone released the film back in 2005, they overtly employed these symbols in the DVD packaging in a container designed to look rather like a decorative Cuban cigar box. I Am Cuba has a great documentary value as well, especially with regard to Havana at that time. It's uncanny to see familiar locations displaced through time and space into the remote fictional world of I Am Cuba. For instance, when Enrique races to the roof of the building with the intent of shooting the police officer. I Am Cuba is an ode to a place that never existed and yet one that continues to exist. The Cuba it depicts may be an imagined one, but it's one we're continuing to imagine today. Now, the cast for the film consists of Sergio Corelli as Alberto, Salvador Wood, Jose Calardo as Pedro, Raul Garcia as Enrique, Luis Maria Golazo as Maria Betty, Jean Buiz as Jim, Alberto Morgan as Angel, and Celia Rodriguez as Gloria, and Fausto Mirabal. The 4K UHD disc contains the film and a separate Blu-ray disc with the following special features. I Am Cuba, the Siberian Mammoth, a 2004 documentary on the making of the film featuring key participants. Interview from 2003 with filmmaker Martin Scorsese. New appreciation of the film by cinematographer Bradford Young. Trailer, alternate Russian dubbed soundtrack, new English subtitle translation, and a written essay by the film critic Juan Antonio Garcia Borrero. And the new cover art is by Century. Ostensibly, I Am Cuba was intended as communist propaganda, celebrating the progress achieved by the Cuban Revolution and dramatizing 4 examples of injustice to the common man in pre-revolutionary Cuba. The link that holds the film together is the spoken monologue, beginning each sequence with the words, Soy Cuba. When I Am Cuba finally premiered in the United States, there was 30 years safe distance from the revolutionary ideals that summoned it into existence. And though it remains a fascinating accident of history, this film lives on as the ultimate expression of what great filmmakers can actually do when they have the world at their disposal. Now, the film has a running time of 141 minutes, and it's in a 1:3:3:1 aspect ratio, and it joins the collection as a 4K UHD combo on Tuesday the 23rd of April as Spine 1214. Next time on Let's Talk Criterion, we bring you Dogfight, the film from Nancy Savoca, and it stars River Phoenix and Lily Taylor. So until then, from me, it's goodbye, and above all, good Criterion viewing.